They used to say that man could fly, he'd have wings, but he did fly. He discovered he had to. Do you wish that the first Apollo mission hadn't reached the moon, or that we hadn't gone to Mars or the nearest star? That's like saying you wish you still operated with scalpels and sewed your patrons with sutures like your great grandfather used to. I'm in command. I could order this, but I'm not, because Dr. McCoy is right in pointing to the enormous danger in any contact with life as intelligent and fantastically advanced as this. But I must point out the possibilities. The potential for knowledge and advancement is equally as great. Risk is our business. That's what this starship is all about. That's why we're aboard her. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Return to Tomorrow, which is episode 22 of season 2 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review every episode of Star Trek The Original Series, one episode at a time. In this episode, Return to Tomorrow, it's the episode where Kirk and crew encounter a superior race of beings that now exists as pure energy, and they want to borrow the bodies of Kirk, Spock, and a young lieutenant commander named Mulholland. They want to borrow their bodies temporarily to create a bunch of androids so that they can transfer in permanently. However, the alien takes over Spock's body, doesn't want to give up Spock's body, and conspires to kill Zargon, the alien entity that is inhabiting Kirk's body, and thinks he gets away with it, and then it proceeds to try to take over the Enterprise. However, Zargon and Kirk survive their ordeal, and they come up with a plan to override this alien and get rid of him. And once done, the other two aliens agree that taking over into androids is not a good idea after all, and they decide to go into oblivion instead. So, this episode is kind of boring, kind of dull. It's never an episode like I hate. It's not like some of these really bad episodes of the original series that when I see that they're coming up, I'm like, oh no, not this episode. don't want to sit through that. It's not that bad. I don't have that reaction to it. I more have the reaction of, oh, there's really not much to this episode. It's okay. As I said, I'd much rather watch this episode than some of the really terrible episodes like Cat's Paw or Private Little War. But yeah, I don't know. I always see this as one of the two original series episodes that have Dr. Pulaski in it. Because I saw Next Generation Season 2 with Dr. Pulaski before I saw this and the other episode she appears in Season 3. I saw Pulaski first, so when I saw these two episodes, I was like, hey, it's a much younger Dr. Pulaski. And so it's hard for me to watch this episode and not see Dr. Pulaski. Although, of course, she's much younger, more beautiful in this episode. But I do like this character. I was just reading Memory Alpha saying that this character, Dr. Anne Mahal, was the highest ranking female officer we did see in the original series at Lieutenant Commander. And I do think they do portray her a bit better than a lot of the other women they do in the original series, that doesn't have a squeaky high voice and isn't just there for a love interest, although she does kind of become that because she's inhabited by this alien that is the love interest of Zargon, and so they make out with Kirk when they're in the when the aliens are controlling their bodies. But other than that, she seemed a very competent Starfleet officer, which, to be fair, is kind of rare to see in the original series, and female officers that are actually competent, not just high pitched and eye candy. So that's good to see. But I think they still, when they first showed her in the scene, they still had Kirk and McCoy had the reaction of, "Oh, pretty lady." Like, they just can't help but do that. But I actually really liked Dr. Pulaski, or Diane Mulder, however you would say her name, Muldaur. Diana Muldaur. She was good in this role, and I can see why they brought her back. It is interesting that they brought her back for the Next Generation as well. Yeah, I think this is a highlight of the episode for me. I always think of it as the Dr. Pulaski one, although her character is not really well developed, to be fair. I think they probably did a better job in her second appearance in Is There in Truth No Beauty of developing her character and giving her more to do. Now, this episode does feel a lot like a third season episode. I was watching it now, I just had that feel. I think it had a lot to do with the music, which apparently was introduced for this episode. And I think the music might have been reused in the third season, so maybe that's why I had that feeling of a third season episode. And also the dullness, how it's kind of boring and dull also. Also reminds me of season 3, and how it's not very remarkable. So yeah, it did remind me much of a season 3 episode. And it's funny because the writer of this episode actually won an award for like a Writers Guild award for writing this episode. I'm like, why? Like, it's really not much to this episode. And it's funny because the writer apparently took his name, or used a pen name instead of his real name for this episode, because he didn't like the fact that Gene Roddenberry reread him, which apparently was very common for Roddenberry to do uncredited rewrites on the scripts, which is not a good thing to do. It's kind of a no-no, but I kind of agree with Roddenberry, because the what he did is the original ending had Zargon and what's her face, the other alien female that took over Dr. Pulaski's body, had them existing. It has pure energy, going into the etherness or whatever. But in Roddenberry's rewrite, he rewrote it to have them go into oblivion, which the original writer said was against his beliefs as a devout Catholic, because he didn't believe in people going into oblivion and didn't want people to rewrite something that went against his beliefs, which is fair, I guess. And maybe I just side more with Roddenberry because my spiritual beliefs are more in line with Roddenberry's, i.e. atheism or an agnosticism, or whatever you want to call it, is closer in line to, yeah, sure, I'm open to the fact that people can go to oblivion. And I think it's kind of ridiculous that the guy was, I'm against that, people don't go into oblivion. Like, why not? I don't know. But anyway, that might just be my personal beliefs. But if someone rewrote me to make my ending more religious, then maybe I would be just as upset as this guy. So, I guess. But anyway, so that speech I did as my intro at the start of the video. I did that because this was one of the most hammy Shatner speeches like ever as Kirk. Like, all those stereotypical like comedians that would imitate Kirk, like Jim Carrey or Kevin Pollak or what have you, like, this is exactly the kind of thing they sound like. It sounds exactly like that over-exaggerated imitation of Kirk. And when William Shatner would often argue against and complain when people did that imitation of him and say, I don't sound anything like that, someone should show him that scene and be like, that's exactly what you sound like here. I'm sorry. So I just had to have my own go at it. Like, it was so, like, the way he pauses and like puts his hand up and his mouth open, and Dr. McCoy, and he like moves his head up and down while he's doing that. Yeah, that was really bad. But the thing about the speech, though, is I disagree with the context of the speech as well, because it was all about, you're like the people who are afraid of going to the moon. Do you think we should have never went to the moon or never went to Mars? What the fuck's wrong with you? Come on, let's take a risk. Risk is our business. But really, that's not what he's talking about doing. He's not talking about taking big steps in human advancement that was earned by humanity. He's talking about cheating. He's talking about being a total hypocrite compared to their own prime directive, because they are violating the prime directive in the opposite direction, because they want to instantly become advanced from a super advanced species, and they want these far advancements in technology, like be able to heal people instantly and have warp engines that could power starships the size of a walnut. They did not earn this, and humanity and the Federation are centuries away from that technology, so they are cheating, and thus they could end up destroying themselves and blowing themselves up, much like the people in that episode Friendship 1 did when they were introduced to antimatter before they were ready for it. So I think Kirk's actually wrong here, and he's actually being presumptuous, trying to guilt trip McCoy by saying, "Oh, you coward! What, would you rather us not go to the moon? What the fuck's wrong with you?" So I disagree with the context of his speech, but they had to sell this some reason as to why Kirk, Spock, and Mulher would be willing to give their bodies over to these powerful aliens that could easily destroy them. And in fact, that is exactly what happens. They don't end up getting any advancements from it. They simply have to stop the evil one from killing everyone, and once that's done, the guys go to oblivion anyway. So if McCoy would have stood his ground and said no, they probably would have been better off, or at the very least, nothing would change. It would there was nothing accomplished by actually doing this, and the whole plot with that evil alien taking over Spock. I think this is what had me down on this episode, or not very interested, because it's so cliche. It's like the instant this alien took over Spock, he was acting like an asshole, and it was like, ha ha ha, the way he was arrogantly laughing and being it was so obvious he was gonna try to keep the body and kill them, and it's a very cliche plot. That being said, it was satisfying though when they did manage to get the better of him, by tricking him into going into oblivion. That was cool, but that plot was just it was more interesting, the plot with Dr. Pulaski and the alien that took over her body, and how she was trying to seduce McCoy and say, look, why don't you, if you let me keep this body, I'm going to save your captain for you. And how McCoy was not on board with that, and then so she tortured him, and then realized what was wrong. That worked better for me. I did like that, but the whole thing with Spock was, they're very cliche. Wasn't a huge fan of that. Now, they mentioned in this episode that, and how these Zargon and these other telepathic aliens kept referring to, Kirk and Starfleet crew as my children, because they implied that, well, millennia ago we sent out colonies, much in the way you guys are doing now, and we think perhaps, we don't know for sure, but maybe Earth was actually one of your colonies and you're actually our descendants. Now, we know that's not true, because we know that it's actually the female changeling, or the same actress who played there, had the species from another galaxy purposely seeded all these life forms to be humanoid in the Milky Way galaxy. We know that from the episode The Chase. And it does make me think, because that scene in the episode with The Chase was made up as kind of a plot hole plugger to try to explain away why all these aliens look exactly like humans with crap on their forehead. And watching this episode, I come to realize like it wasn't actually necessary, because this episode could have explained that right there. They could have said they were all descendants of these guys, but they weren't as clear. They're like, ooh, maybe, perhaps, and we had a couple planets or whatever. Whereas in the aliens in the episode of The Chase were more clear that yes, we specifically are your descendants, and we see this entire galaxy. So I guess maybe the Zargon people were actually descendants of them. I don't know. But anyway, I don't really care to connect that kind of canon, because it's all just plot hole excuses in anyways, or plot hole pluggers. I should call them trying to fix plot holes. Yeah, I don't know. I guess the other thing I was going to say about this episode is this is the first time George Takei has returned to Sulu. He was absent for, I think, 6 episodes. While apparently he was filming a movie called The Green Berets. And so that's why, he didn't appear very much in season 2. In this episode, he barely appears anyway. So it's almost not much of a point in having him. But, yeah. That's Return to Tomorrow. Kind of a average, forgettable episode. So now's the time where I'd like to thank those that support me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated, and yeah, it really helps the channel going. So we have Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictix, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Avals, Brian A., Alessandro Migalisio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal House. Thank you all so very much for your support. It is extremely appreciated. So we do have a couple comments, I believe, for this episode. First comment is from Ricky, who says, "Man, oh man, this episode sucks. What a boring episode. Every time I watch it, it's hard to not fall asleep to this episode. The premise is so dumb and forgettable. I mean, the three-star fleet officers that would offer themselves for these random beings, and as far as they know, these aliens could be up to no good. And that was the case for one of them that was possessing Spock's body. I mean, this entire episode I was just not sold on. However, the only redeeming quality for this episode is the speech in the ready room about taking risks, and that's why they're in space. That was the only good scene from this episode. Other than that, there's nothing to it, so my rating is a 2 out of 10. Yeah, I disagree on the speech. I actually thought the speech was very hammy, Shatnery. I mean, the whole risk is our business, that was cool, but still and I disagreed with the context of the speech as well, as I explained. But anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, "Return to Tomorrow. Oh gods, where do I start? There's a shitload of scenery chewing done by Shatner in this episode. I do get the impression that Nimoy is enjoying himself, though. It's interesting to see him break out of the Vulcan mold. Why do Sargon, Teresa, and Henrock not just go to Harry Mudd's planet and build their androids? Sargon, referring to the away team as my children, gives me bad memories of Apollo." And yes, that is actually a very good point about Apollo. It does sort of remind me of that. And yeah, that's a very clever thing to bring up. I'm Mud. And they could just take over those androids, or at least build them there. But yeah. Anyway, my rating for Return to Tomorrow out of 10 is a 5 average. Yeah, I guess I'm not as negative as Ricky was, but For me, this episode is just forgettable. Average is a good way to put it. I don't think it sucks. I don't think it's horrible, but it's not particularly good either. There's no good nor bad. It's kind of just there. Yeah, I mean, I had some issues with it, some things I liked, but for the most part, it was just kind of forgettable and didn't really need to exist. So that is it for my review of Return to Tomorrow. Coming up next on Enchantment of Eternity, next Thursday will of course be my latest review for Picard. Saturday I will be back with Patterns of Force, the original series review, and Monday, finally up to another revisited video. It's been a while since I did one of these. On Monday will be my revisited for the Ultimate Computer over on Patreon for those Patreon supporters. Be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover the original series, and I also cover many more Star Trek videos and videos on many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.